First, I want to talk about gun reform actions and lack of actions on the federal and on the state level. On the federal level, we have had some reforms actually passed this past year. In the omnibus, we saw that the CDC can now study gun violence, even though they are not allowed to take any positions or say anything that would be deemed to promote or to advocate against gun violence. We had a Fix NICS bill that will ensure that our agencies are getting the information about those who've been convicted of crimes or those who may be ineligible for other reasons into the background check system earlier, so that those background checks will be more accurate. We even see rulemaking to potentially ban bump stocks, which were used in the Las Vegas shooting. But the list is short of action that's been taken by this Congress, and the list of unfinished business is long. First is the failure to even give a hearing on reinstituting the federal assault weapon ban. I say reinstituting because many people forget from 1994 into 2004 we had such a ban. During that time, people's Second Amendment rights were still in effect, but we banned weapons that have no civilian use whatsoever. And we saw during that period, the statistics bear out. Because when you look at gun violence and mass shootings at that time, I challenge anybody watching this tonight across America to recall whether they remember during that time the number of mass shootings, the number of deaths during the assault weapons ban. And then we look at 2004 to 2014. The number of incidents tripled. The number of deaths tripled. And that's just to 2014, not including Charleston or Vegas or the Pulse nightclub shooting or recently in Parkland. We also see universal background checks still not fixed. 90% of Americans support this. 90% of Americans support that there should no longer be loopholes in our universal background checks. That you could easily, right now, sell in a gun show without any background check. This makes no sense. You could sell in a private sale without a background check. This makes no sense. This is an easy way for people who are wholly ineligible to be able to buy guns every day in every state. And so what's the purpose of fixing our Fix NICS bill and having better background checks if these giant loopholes that swallow the whole? And also, these extended magazine clips. The reason people heard 45 to 50 shots fired in a minute is because of these extended magazines and these assault weapons. When you have a shotgun, when you have a handgun, and I'll let Congresswoman Val Demings talk a little bit more with her background in law enforcement, yes, you can hurt people, but you can't do the kind of carnage we've seen with these assault weapons. And I look forward to hearing your opinions on that, Congresswoman Demings. I also want to talk about gun reform on the state level. We had some victories. We had some defeats. After fighting to keep guns out of teachers' hands in schools, that battle was lost, while we've been able to prevent them from being on college campuses. But we did have some positives, and I give 100% of the credit to the victims of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas high school shooting and the victims of the Pulse nightclub shooting, who stood hand in hand and went up to Tallahassee to advocate for greater gun safety. And I could say, having been survived nearly 10 years in the Florida legislature, it is not a welcome place for a lot of these reforms. But they had some great reforms passed. They raised the age to purchase firearms from 18 to 21, they banned bump stocks, which President Trump, it's time to follow suit like they did in Florida. Attorney General Sessions, it's time to get those rules in place. They also were able to harden our schools. Now, that's something that I was remiss before to not mention. We did have a Safe Schools Act to help harden our schools. They also created critical red flag legislation that allows our law enforcement, I look forward to your comments on this as well, from your background, Congresswoman Demings, to allow law enforcement officers who are on the scene and see that someone will be a danger to others to be able to take away their guns for a limited time period and then to be able to go and request a judge to get them back. We do this in domestic violence, as you're familiar with. So these are things that actually have happened in Florida that are moving the ball forward. And if it can happen in our state that has been so protective of some of these critical reforms, I believe it can happen both on the federal level and that Republicans and Democrats can join together for these reforms. But lastly, I want to talk about, but not least, our first responders, because we can't talk about action without talking about our first responders, the brave men and women of the Orlando Police Department that you had the honor of being chief of, Congresswoman Demings, the brave men and women of the Orange County Sheriff's Office, which your husband is our honorable sheriff of, our Orlando and our Orange County fire departments who are on the scene along with our EMTs to give life-saving aid to 68 injured people and try to save some of those 49 who we lost. We've had some action to help out our first responders too. Our UCF Restores program, which helps with PTSD for firefighters, law enforcement, and our military, immerses these heroes into virtual reality so that they can unfortunately have to relive those experiences, but then meet with a psychologist or a psychiatrist to talk about that, to bring up these repressed memories. And we have had tremendous success. We have had tremendous feedback from our local fire departments, from our local law enforcement, and from our military. And we were able to work together, you and I and Congresswoman Murphy, to get $4 million in our federal budget and open up more of this treatment, not only to our military, but to victims of sexual assault in this recent National Defense Authorization Act bill. We also saw, and I'll let you expound on this more, anti-terrorism dollars finally come back down to Orlando that you led the charge on, and thank you for that, Congresswoman Demings, for doing that. From your perch, helping out with Homeland Security and being our expert on security and on anti-terrorism, protecting the homeland. And then finally, I want to end this part of our section by talking about the advancements in our pension system in Florida to help out our first responders. Your husband was a leader, is a leader, but was a leader in the state legislature as sheriff to help with the Adam Pierce Act, which made sure that our fallen law enforcement who were paralyzed but still wanted to work wouldn't lose their pensions because they want to do some administrative work and want to still be involved and want to go to work every day and do their part for justice. And that was a bill that your husband spearheaded through, and I remember. We also had an amendment of my bill onto that bill, you may or may not recall, and the sheriff was really nice to allow us to do it along with law enforcement to help our firefighters. There was a loophole where if our firefighters died in training exercises, they'd get nothing. They'd get no death benefit for their families. They wouldn't get the health care benefit. They'd be left with nothing because of this loophole. And John C. Curry and Mr. Beggs and Mr. Mickle from Osceola County, John Curry from Volusia County, they retrospectively were able to get relief because we made it retrospective. And then finally, we were able to, after we lost Deputy Pine in Orange County, with Sheriff Jerry Demings helping us lead the way, made sure that first responders who died in the line of duty didn't get 50% of their pension. They weren't half heroes. they now get 100% of their pension for their families because they are 100% heroes. And they gave 100% of their life and put 100% of their courage and their life on the line. And at the very least, their families can be taken care of when they are no longer with us. And so there is a lot that we've honored with Action over the years, both before and after Pulse. But there's a lot more to go. And I look forward to hearing your comments on that, Congresswoman Demings. And thank you again for your service as our Orlando chief. And I know that there's a lot that you could bring to this conversation that we're continuing on with based upon your rich experience in these fields.